5 of the country's top doctors looked a billionaire in the eye and told him there was nothing more to do, that his 7-year-old son had a rare aggressive cancer and only 2 months left to live. No treatment would work. No surgery was possible. They said to prepare for the end. But while the world gave up on that little boy, one person didn't. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't famous. She was the Maid. And what she discovered, alone, without support, without a degree, didn't just prove the experts wrong. She not only saved the boy's life, but also uncovered something that had been sitting right under their noses the entire time. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We'd love to know that. Liam was only 7 years old when the doctors gave him the worst possible news. They told his father that a rare aggressive cancer had spread through the boy's trachea and lungs, choking his breath from the inside. Because of the tumor's location and severity, Liam could no longer speak clearly. His breathing was heavy and slow, sometimes turning into painful coughing fits that left him gasping for air. He couldn't walk on his own anymore and depended on a wheelchair. His once energetic body was now fragile, tired, and dependent on others for almost everything. His father, Adrian Cole, was one of the wealthiest real estate investors in the country. The moment he heard the diagnosis, he moved mountains. Within days, Liam had been evaluated by the 5 most respected cancer specialists in the nation. Each one ordered new scans, blood tests, and imaging. Each one reviewed the images with cold precision, and each one, in the end, repeated the same sentence in different words. The cancer could not be removed, could not be treated, and Liam had about 2 months left to live. Adrian refused to accept it. Years earlier, he had already lost the love of his life when Liam was born. His wife, Emma, had died during childbirth. Since the day Liam came into the world, Adrian had poured everything into being a devoted father. Hearing that his son's life had an invisible countdown attached to it shattered something inside him. For the first time, the man who could buy almost anything had found something his wealth could not fix. He begged the doctors for options. He asked about experimental therapies, overseas clinical trials, unconventional treatments, anything that could buy more time. But the answers always returned to the same cold conclusion. The tumor had wrapped itself around Liam's windpipe, invading parts of his lungs. Surgery would almost certainly kill him on the operating table. Chemotherapy and radiation would not touch this type of malignant growth. Their advice was to take Liam home, make him comfortable, and use the remaining weeks to say goodbye. Adrian watched Liam struggle to lift a cup or reach the remote control. The boy who had once sprinted through the house with toy airplanes now could barely sit up without help. He slept most of the day and woke up in pain. Sometimes he cried quietly, not out of terror, but out of confusion. He didn't understand why he wasn't getting better. The nurses treated Adrian with the gentle sorrow reserved for families whose stories had only one possible ending. They handed him pamphlets about hospice care and explained how Liam could spend his last weeks at home. Adrian nodded and thanked them, but inside he was crumbling. The large mansion that once echoed with laughter now felt like it was holding its breath. Adrian focused on the present moment because thinking about the future was unbearable. He adjusted Liam's oxygen mask, helped him drink juice through a straw, and sat through endless cartoon reruns. On the surface, he remained composed, but at night, when Liam fell asleep, Adrian stared at the ceiling and wished he could trade his own life for his child's. In that same house, moving quietly through the halls, was someone who refused to accept the script everyone else had already agreed to. Her name was Elena. She had been working as the housekeeper in the Cole household for almost 3 years. She was discreet, soft-spoken, and so efficient that most days people forgot she was there. But Liam never forgot. To him, Elena was not simply the maid. She was his second mother, the one who was always there when he needed something, and the one who never treated him like he was already halfway gone. Every morning, Elena arrived before sunrise. She prepared Liam's special juices and soups, carried him gently from bed to wheelchair, bathed him with slow, careful movements so he wouldn't feel pain, and made sure his medicine was given at exactly the right time. At night, when fear made him restless, it was her hand he reached for. She sat by his bed, listening to his half-whispered worries, and murmured soft words of comfort until his eyes finally closed. She didn't try to replace his real mother. She simply stepped into the empty space life had left behind and filled it with patience and care. Years earlier, Elena had been a mother herself. Her daughter, Sophia, had been a bright, laughing little girl who loved to dance in the living room. One winter, Sophia came down with what looked like an ordinary fever. The local doctor said it was just a virus and sent them home with simple medication. But as the days passed, Sophia got worse. Elena begged the clinic to look again, to run more tests, to take her seriously. No one listened. By the time a different doctor discovered the real problem, it was too late. Sophia died from a condition that could have been cured if it had been diagnosed earlier. That loss marked Elena forever. She promised herself she would never again blindly trust reassurance without proof. Late at night, while other people slept, she read about symptoms, lab results, infections, and tumors. She watched medical lectures online, scanned through case reports, and forced herself to learn the language of diagnosis from scratch. She never pretended to be a doctor, but she understood enough to know that mistakes could happen, especially when people were rushed, arrogant, or overconfident. When Liam got sick, Eleanor watched everything. She watched the doctors as they spoke, noting when they avoided answering Adrian's questions directly. She memorized the names on medication bottles and the way Liam's body responded after each new drug. She knew the sound of his breathing better than anyone. As the weeks passed, a strange unease took root in her chest. She had seen what a dying child looked like. She had watched Sophia fade, losing interest in everything, her eyes turning dull as her body surrendered. Liam was not like that. He was weak and in pain, but there were still moments when his eyes lit up, when he laughed at a silly joke on television, when he tried to play. There were hours where he spoke about things he wanted to do when he got better, and his voice carried real belief. It did not match the doctor's absolute certainty that the end was near. Elena returned again and again to the photocopied report she had quietly gathered. The official diagnosis described a diffuse malignant mass with no clear borders, spread along the trachea and infiltrating lung tissue. But what she saw every day didn't fully align with that description. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had been oversimplified, that a conclusion had been reached too quickly and never questioned again. One grey afternoon, rain tapping against the windows, Liam lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Elena sat beside him with a small portable ultrasound device she had bought second-hand. She had started using it to gently scan his neck and upper chest, partly as a comfort ritual, partly because it gave her a way to see what might be happening beneath the skin. She had taught herself the basics from online tutorials. As she ran the device over the side of his neck, Liam's eyes filled with tears. "Elena," he murmured, "am I going to live?" The question hit her like a punch. He had asked Adrian the same thing days earlier and received only silence. Her hand trembled slightly as she moved the probe a little lower. Then something on the small screen made her pause. There, beside the pale curve of cartilage, was a dark, round shape. It was sharply defined, more like a single lump than something spreading without borders. The shape remained, stubborn and clear. She had seen scans in the reports. None of them had highlighted anything like this. Her heart beat harder, afraid to believe what her eyes were telling her. Just then, Adrian stepped into the room. He expected to find quiet, heavy silence. Instead, the first thing he heard was his son's trembling voice asking, "Am I going to live?" Adrian froze on the spot. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He watched Liam's small face and heard the echo of all the things he had not been able to say that first time his son asked. Before the silence swallowed them again, Elena spoke. She looked at Liam, then at Adrian, then at the screen. "You will, my love," she said softly, but with an iron certainty. "Your second mom will find out how." Her words hung in the air, defiant and impossible to ignore. Adrian stared at her, stunned. She had never made a promise like that before. Elena pointed at the ultrasound screen and beckoned Adrian closer. "Look," she said, "this isn't in the reports." Adrian leaned over, trying to make sense of the blurry shapes. He didn't understand the image, but he understood Elena's tone. She wasn't guessing. She was sure she had found something that didn't fit the original story. That night, after Liam fell asleep more peacefully than usual, Elena sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. She froze the ultrasound image and printed it. She spread out the old reports, comparing descriptions. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that what she had seen was not what the doctors had described. The mass the specialists talked about was supposed to be diffuse without a clear outline. What she had captured was compact, clearly bordered, and sitting in a very specific place. There was one person she trusted enough to show this to, Dr. Raul Mendez, a retired physician who had been a close friend of her late sister. Elena called him early the next morning. She didn't share everything over the phone, only that it was urgent and that a child's life might depend on his help. He told her to come immediately. At his small house, they sat at an old wooden table. Elena showed him the video and still images she had printed. "Doctor." Mendez watched the recording without saying a word. He replayed it, zoomed in, adjusted the brightness. The silence stretched on until Elena could barely stand it. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Elena," he said carefully, "this doesn't look like a malignancy." She stared at him, not daring to breathe. He tapped the image with his finger. "This shape, the way it sits here, the borders, the density, it looks more like a calcified granuloma, a hardened lump from an old infection. I've seen a couple of cases like this in my career. They can be mistaken for tumors, especially if the person reading the scan is already expecting cancer." "Can it be removed?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded. "Yes. It's not simple, but it is absolutely possible. With the right surgeon, this can be taken out. This is not something that spreads and kills like the cancer they described." Elena felt as if the floor were moving under her feet. For months, the greatest experts had said there was no hope. Now, in this modest house, a retired doctor was telling her the opposite. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "As sure as I can be from this," he answered. "What you need now is someone who will actually look with an open mind, someone who isn't afraid to admit others were wrong." On the way home, Elena's thoughts raced. If she was right, then Liam had been sentenced to die because no one had bothered to question the first interpretation of his scans. She went back to the hospital where Liam had been treated and requested a meeting with one of the specialists. She brought the printed images, the USB, and a carefully written summary of what Dr. Mendez suspected. In the small consultation room, she laid everything out and began explaining her observations. The doctor barely glanced at the images before cutting her off. "With all due respect," he said coldly, "you are the cleaning staff, correct?" She nodded. "We went to medical school. We know how to read scans. You are making dangerous assumptions." A younger doctor in the corner smirked. Elena's cheeks burned, but she repeated her request. "Just look closely. If I'm wrong, you lose nothing. But if I'm right..." The older doctor pushed the papers back toward her. "The case is closed. You're giving the family false hope. Don't interfere." She tried another physician, then another. The responses were always the same: dismissal, annoyance, condescension. No one was willing to reconsider the diagnosis. When she tried to reach Adrian directly, she was intercepted by his legal team. They warned her that if she continued to meddle in medical decisions, she might be removed from the house entirely. That night, alone in her small room, Eleanor finally broke down. Not because they had insulted her, but because every hour they wasted was an hour Liam didn't have. After the tears dried, anger and determination settled in their place. If the doctors close to home wouldn't listen, she would find someone farther away who would. She spent the entire night searching online. She read articles about misdiagnosed respiratory conditions and granulomas that had been mistaken for cancer. Eventually, she found the name of a globally respected pediatric diagnostician, Dr. Julian Hart. He was known for taking on complex cases that others had given up on and for finding errors in diagnoses that seemed unquestionable. Elena found an old professional email and wrote to him. She told him Liam's story, attached the video and images, and added everything she and Dr. Mendez had observed. She ended with a plea. "Please, if I am wrong, tell me. But if I am right, help me save this child." 2 days later, an answer arrived. It was short. "Send the boy. Immediately." Elena printed the message and waited until Adrian returned. He looked exhausted, carrying grief like a heavy coat. She stepped forward, holding the paper out. "Please, read this," she said quietly. He scanned the lines, then looked up, confused and wary. She explained who Dr. Hart was, what Dr. Mendez had seen, and why she believed the original diagnosis might be wrong. Adrian's face tightened. He had staked everything on the opinions of the 5 top specialists. Accepting that they might be wrong meant accepting that he had almost allowed his son to die without a fight. Elena said only one more sentence. "Look into Liam's eyes. He still believes he's going to live. We owe it to him to check." That night, Adrian sat beside his son's bed. Liam whispered, "Did my second mom find something?" Adrian forced himself to answer, "Yes, she did, and we're going to check it." By morning, the decision had been made. Adrian arranged a private flight. The trip was kept quiet. Only Adrian, Liam, Elena, and a small medical escort boarded the plane. Liam was pale and tired, but excited. "Is this trip going to fix me?" he asked. Elena squeezed his hand. "It's going to give us the truth, and the truth is what you need." The clinic where Dr. Hart worked was smaller than big city hospitals, but equipped with cutting-edge technology. When they arrived, he greeted them with focused kindness. He listened to Adrian, then asked Eleanor to show him the ultrasound video. He asked detailed questions about what she had observed over time. Then he ordered a full set of new scans and tests. That evening, they gathered in a quiet consultation room. Dr. Hart placed 2 images side by side, one new scan, one old. He pointed to the mass near the trachea. "This is not a malignant tumor. It is a calcified granuloma." Adrian blinked, struggling to process the words. "So it's not cancer?" "No," Dr. Hart replied. "It is a hardened lump caused by an old infection. It mimics cancer on less precise images, especially if the person reading the scan already has cancer in mind. It compresses the airway, which is why your son was struggling to breathe, but it does not spread." Liam's life could be saved with a specialized endoscopic surgery. They would go in through the throat, break up and remove the granuloma, and follow up with antibiotics. The procedure carried risk because of the location, but it was nowhere near as hopeless as the original doctors had claimed. Recovery would take weeks, not months, of slow dying. Adrian's shoulders shook as he covered his face with his hands. Everything he had believed was suddenly turned upside down. Elena felt tears in her own eyes, but she stayed upright. The boy lay in a nearby room, unaware that his future had just been rewritten. 2 days later, the surgery took place. Elena walked with Liam to the operating room door, holding his hand while he tried to be brave. Adrian stood beside them, gripping his son's fingers like a lifeline. Once Liam disappeared behind the doors, time slowed to a crawl. Adrian and Elena sat in a small waiting area, saying almost nothing. After just under 2 hours, Dr. Hart stepped into the room. His expression was calm. "It went perfectly. The granuloma has been completely removed. He is already waking up. His airway is clear." Adrian let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Elena closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you. When they were finally allowed to see Liam, he was drowsy but conscious. He looked around, saw both of them, and smiled in a way they hadn't seen for months, full, unstrained, and bright. "Hi," he said, his voice surprisingly clear. He took a deep breath, then another. "It doesn't hurt," he added. Adrian leaned over and hugged him carefully, tears running down his face. Elena stood on the other side of the bed, one hand on Liam's shoulder, feeling the warmth of a future she had refused to let go of. News of what had happened reached the outside world faster than any of them expected. A journalist picked it up. "Billionaire's dying son saved after housekeeper challenges 5 top doctors," the headline read. The story exploded across social media and into international news. People were outraged that 5 highly regarded specialists had all repeated the same fatal mistake. They were equally fascinated by Eleanor, the quiet worker whose persistence had saved a life. Requests poured in for Eleanor to give interviews and speeches. She refused almost all of them. She didn't want to become a celebrity. Eventually, she agreed to send a single written statement to a journalist she trusted. It contained just one line: "People who serve up close often see what those in power refuse to look at." That sentence struck a nerve around the world. Adrian had to confront an uncomfortable reality. He had accepted the original verdict too easily. He had trusted prestige over observation. If Elena had not insisted, his son would have been allowed to die from a treatable condition. Instead of letting guilt consume him, he chose to turn it into action. He hired investigators to review everything the original 5 doctors had done. The medical board eventually issued a public report acknowledging that Liam's diagnosis had been wrong from the start and that confirmation bias and professional arrogance had played a significant role. Some of the doctors were suspended, others were ordered into retraining. Elena did not celebrate their punishment. For her, the true victory was simpler. Liam was alive. He slowly regained his strength, first sitting up without help, then walking, then running again. The first time he sprinted across the garden without gasping for air, Adrian cried openly while Eleanor laughed through her tears. Liam returned to school, made new friends, and drew pictures of himself as a superhero, complete with a small figure beside him labeled Second Mom. Adrian created a foundation in Liam's name dedicated to reviewing terminal diagnoses in children. Its mission was to offer second looks and ensure that no family was told to go home and wait for the end without absolute certainty. He asked Elena to become its director. People in his social circle were baffled. She wasn't a doctor, but Adrian had seen what most of them had not: her capacity to notice, to care, to question when everyone else stayed quiet. Her role would not be to decide treatments, but to guard against the same blind spots that had almost killed his son. Elena accepted quietly. She still spent much of her time in the Cole home, making sure Liam took his medicine and finished his homework. But now she also sat at a desk, reading letters from families who had been told there was no hope. The foundation helped many of them secure second opinions. In more than a few cases, other terminal diagnoses were revised, treatments were found, and lives were saved. When people asked him about his story, he never called it a miracle. "They were wrong," he would say simply, "and she didn't give up." Then he would point at Elena. In a world obsessed with titles and status, a quiet maid had changed everything by trusting what she saw, what she knew, and who she loved.